Welcome to Know Your Rights, New Jersey. I am your host, Rhinold Lamar Ponder. On today's show, we're going to explore the intersection between race, religion, and justice, specifically as it pertains to mass incarceration of people of color and mental health issues. A movement has grown out of necessity around the issues concerning the growth of the prison industry. This growth has coincided with the war on drugs and the war on terrorism. The growth of the industry has disproportionately impacted people of color and people of color, their communities, and individuals. Today, as in the past, religious organizations have played a vital role in addressing these challenges by organizing and providing resources. To help us understand these issues, we have as our guest today Dr. Vanessa M. Wilson. Dr. Wilson is the pastor of Magnolia Road United Methodist Church in Pemberton. She is also the chair for the Commission on Religion and Race of the Greater New Jersey Conference of the United Methodist Church. Dr. Wilson, welcome to Know Your Rights, New Jersey.
Thank you. Good morning.
First, let's start with the issue of mass incarceration, which some identify as the new Jim Crow. Will you please explain to us what that is and what does that mean to us?
Well, the term was actually coined by Michelle Alexander in her book, The New Jim Crow. And in that book, she explored patterns of incarceration as it pertained to African Americans and African American males. And what we found, or what she found, and what all of us knew, but we didn't have this data to prove it, was that there are more African Americans incarcerated. We're incarcerated disproportionately. And in fact, what is very alarming is that there are more African Americans incarcerated than at the height of the slave trade. So that is alarming.
Yeah. So what does it also mean in terms of the communities besides the people who are incarcerated? Does it impact the communities at all?
Well, of course it impacts the communities. It impacts all of us. When we look at Jim Crow, let's talk a little bit about Jim Crow. We were out speaking one day and someone said, well, what happened to the old Jim Crow? And they didn't understand that Jim Crow was a systemic array of laws and systems in order to keep African Americans in place, to contain a people. When you look at the way the laws have evolved, especially the war against drugs, we find that the laws actually impact African Americans disproportionately and keep African Americans moving towards being incarcerated. Now, your question, how does that impact the community? Well, when you have 1 out of every 4 African American males impacted some way by the criminal justice system, either incarcerated, in parole, or on probation, that impacts their ability, to provide for their families. It impacts their ability to get a continuing education. It impacts their ability, in some cases, to even connect with their families. Right. You know, historically, we lived together. African Americans would live together as families. We were very communal and supportive of one another. But one thing that happened out of the war on drugs, or that series of laws, is that if someone was convicted of a drug crime, then they could no longer receive any type of federal funding. So that would cut off education, that would cut off certain benefits. But what's really interesting, if you had a mom or a grandmother or a sibling who lived in public housing, you couldn't go back home. You could never return to public housing. You couldn't spend the night with your mom. You couldn't stay in that supportive environment. So now it had severed a relationship or a necessary support system.
And in some cases, did it force those moms, those grandmoms, out of their homes because of their child's convictions?
Well, if they wanted to support their children, or and you know, there's some interesting films that we show, but if you look at the beginning of this war on drugs, and the war on drugs, as we know, was just a series of laws. We said, just say no to drugs. But what the war on drugs did, it had heavier penalties for any crimes that were affiliated with drugs. Then it also bifurcated in that it had even more severe penalties if someone had crack cocaine. And crack cocaine was historically in African American communities or low income communities. But the police in the beginning, and I call it almost a reign of terror, would just break into homes. You know, so many of the laws in terms of search and seizure or your rights or Miranda rights, they would discard it, because now we were fighting this war on drugs. So you talk about moms or grandmoms or wives who would literally be terrorized as the police would break into their homes. So not only did, in some cases, they left their homes because they wanted to support a loved one, they left their homes because they were afraid. Because once they were targeted, then there was a problem. There was consistently a problem in that apartment or in that home.
Do you think that part of the police focus on these type of communities had something to do with the federal funding, the need for numbers to continue the growth of the police departments?
Well, it's a numbers game. And you know, all of America at the end of the day, we're capitalists, and it all ends up being a numbers game. So you would have police officers who would say, if I'm investigating a homicide, it might take a lot longer. But if I know I can get a drug bust, which is instant, it's quick, I could go out, I could pick up, you know, a group of young men, I have arrest at the end of the day, my numbers look better. It's more expedient, and then there also were additional bonuses because now we were fighting the war on drugs.
Now, do you see any connection? The war on drugs, from my understanding, really began in the 80s during the Reagan administration. But since 9/11, there's been a new war, and that's a war on terrorism. Has that been similar impact to communities of color, or has there been some type of change?
Well, I think that the war on terrorism has impacted the criminal justice system in that it has relaxed standards, you know. So now if you use the buzzword Homeland Security or terrorism, that there's a different procedure police can follow. But I want to go back to a little bit about the war on drugs, which I think had the greatest impact on our community. And we often think of, you know, the Reagan administration, but actually, did you know that most of the laws pertaining to the war on drugs was passed during the Clinton administration? You know, so this war on drugs is bipartisan. Everybody came down. It was a quick way to alarm people, to motivate people. Everybody was afraid of drugs. No one wants to be a drug addict, right? No one wants their child to be a drug addict. No one wants to. So so you had this meeting, the drugs, the drug addicts, the drug addicts. But in reality, it wasn't what it appeared to be. So you had a lot of media money going in. Remember, you mentioned Nancy Reagan, Just Say No. So we had a lot of media campaigns, but when you look at the arrest records, when you go back to the data, it really impacted African American communities more.
Now, were the African Americans being arrested and convicted? Were they being convicted as warlords, crime lords, or was it possessory? Or these simply users?
I think the majority, and I don't have the date on it, but I believe the majority were simply users, because even possession, what happened during that period of time was mandatory sentencing. So with the mandatory sentencing, even if you were in possession, there was a mandatory sentence. We took away the discretion that the judges had at that time.
Right.
So a simple possession charge could land you at 10 to 15 years. You know, not even that you were using, but that you were in possession. So just riding down in a car with someone who may have had not even crack cocaine, but marijuana, you know, marijuana.
Right.
Everyone in the car, there was mandatory sentencing. And then we also need to look at drug-free school zones. So when you're in a densely populated area, because around the drug-free school zone, and we see the signs, and it was a good thing. We all want drug-free school zones, but what is the impact? So you see a drug-free school zone, the sentencing is higher. Okay, there are additional penalties. In our communities, it's more dense, and we're more densely populated, so there are more school zones. So you could literally move from one school zone to the next school zone because there are community schools in the neighborhood. So if you, in Newark, where I'm from originally, you know, anywhere almost in Newark is a drug-free school zone. So if you get arrested, it's even a higher penalty. So it started to disproportionately impact in that way. Whereas if you lived in suburbia or a more rural community where there's one regional high school or one regional middle school, the drug-free school zone was smaller.
So what is this movement regarding the issue, and how did you become involved in it?
Well, I'm a United Methodist, and I'm, yay for the United Methodist. And I actually got involved in the movement when I was a layperson. In our church, we have boards and commission that set direction for our church.
Okay.
So the General Board of Church and Society, in I think it was 2012, agreed to get involved with the Samuel D. Proctor Conference to really partner and examine mass incarceration and how it was impacting African American communities. So they selected about 40 delegates from across the nation. We went to the Samuel D. Proctor Conference in Chicago. We were trained. We had an opportunity to hear Michelle Alexander speak. We engaged in various study groups, and we went back to our respective communities to get our communities involved.
Okay.
So the General Board of Church and Society funded the training. One of the social principles of the United Methodist Church is that we exercise what we call social holiness.
Okay.
You know, we believe in social justice. That's a part of who we are.
Okay.
So that was our initiative. Since that time, it has grown, and we have expanded the things that we do in that area. And I've also become a pastor, so roles have changed, and I now serve my conference as the chair of the Commission on Religion and Race.
Okay.
And religion and race actually looks at how religion and race intersect and how we as Christians have a responsibility to look at our society, to look at current social justice issues, to look at racial issues, and ensure that we are taking a true Christian approach to making sure the kingdom of God is inclusive of all of God's children. Now, our social justice initiative with the Commission is to continue to look at this issue of mass incarceration, how it impacts our communities, but not only look at it, but to bring solution. So one of the solutions that we've decided to embark upon is to train faith-based communities to become healing communities. And a healing community is a program that was actually started by Dean Trulaire, and where we train a faith-based organization to work with people who are returning to the community. It's a model of restorative justice, and it looks at both the person who's been incarcerated as well as the victim to bring healing to both people so that now we could work collaboratively for solutions to the whole community. So we've done healing community training, I think it was in the spring, I don't remember the exact date, and we will be doing healing community training again in November. That will be the second weekend in November. And at that point, we're going to do 2 days to train faith-based organizations and faith-based leaders who want to become a healing community or a station of hope, but we're also going to train people who are interested in training in this program.
So what exactly does this healing community training contain, and then what do those who are trained actually do?
Okay, the Healing Communities training is a model. Healing Communities is a model of restorative justice. So we look at the issues around incarceration, so we will have some understanding of the criminal justice system, but we also look at the models in terms of language we use. How do we make someone welcome back into the community? So one concrete example, in Healing Communities, we're taught that we don't call anyone an ex-felon or an ex-con or somebody just got back. They're a returning citizen. Because when they return to the community, they are a citizen and they're returning to our community. So we use language that is affirming and positive. Also, we work with people who have been victims so that they understand, they need a release as well.
Right.
So that they have the release and go through that process of forgiveness and reconciliation. And it's taught in multiple ways. Film is a modality. Of course, there's a lecture method. It's interactive. And that first training is 6 hours. And then those people go back into their congregation, and there are models and booklets that they can use to then extend that training for the congregation until the entire congregation is ready to become a station of hope or a healing community.
Now, in addition to the training, are you at all able to provide other services for the citizens returning from prison into the community, or what is it that you're able to, put together?
Okay, the commission is now providing the training,
Okay.
and so the training is very valuable. We're providing it either at low or no cost.
Okay.
So
And how do you get that? How do you get the training? Do you call someone in particular, or?
They could, right now, I put everything on my website, so they could go to my website,
Okay.
and there's a link there, and it'll link through. Our announcements for the training generally come out through the General Conference.
Mm-hmm.
So even if they go to the Greater New Jersey Annual Conference website and click on the calendar, they'll see when the next training is coming up, and they can register right through that website. So there are two websites. You could go to vanessawilson.info, or you could go to the Greater New Jersey Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. Either website will direct you to the training and to our events.
Tell me a little bit more about the work that you guys do regarding mental health. You yourself are a mental health professional.
Not a mental health professional.
Okay.
I wish. Wow, that would be exciting. I am actually a nationally certified mental health first aid trainer. And that's actually a recent designation.
Okay.
But when,
Okay.
in looking at...
Well, tell me what that is, because I made the mistake of calling you a professional. That sounded very professional to me. so tell me what that is.
Mental health first aid.
Mm-hmm.
Let me give you an example. If I was having a heart attack, or you thought I was having a heart attack, you've probably been trained in CPR.
Right.
Or if I fell off the chair, you've probably been trained in first aid. But if you saw my behavior becoming strange, or if you thought I was going into depression, or you saw me becoming very anxious, what would you administer?
I'm not totally sure.
You're not, and neither is a lot. No one's totally sure. And that's why we have mental health first aid. Mental health first aid was actually started in Australia and has been adopted for use in this country recently. And mental health first aid trains individuals not to become mental health professionals, but it gives them the skills, just like CPR, just like regular first aid. You know, CPR doesn't make you a cardiologist, right? But CPR helps you have that interim measure until the emergency services arrive. Mental health first aid gives you that interim measure until you get the person to the appropriate professional.
Okay.
So if my behavior starts to change, or you're noticing something that's different, whether it's anxiety, depression, psychosis, you're trained with a model so that you will know exactly how to speak to me and who to call and how to make the appropriate referrals, how to assess the situation. This is very important for everyone.
Right.
And especially in light of some of the things that have been going on in our country. Recently, or not actually recently, after the shootings in Connecticut, President Obama is stressing and urging every school system to have personnel trained in mental health first aid, so that they can see things that are coming, so that they understand. And also when you have students who've been traumatized, because the trauma doesn't often show up immediately. Sometimes trauma can show up almost a year later. So we need to be very conscious as we watch for these signs of trauma, because we want people to get the appropriate help early. Early intervention is always the best intervention. So mental health first aid, it's an 8-hour training. It's a one-day training that you go through, and at the end of that training, you become a mental health first aider. In that, not a professional, not a clinician or a therapist, but you have the tools to now be a mental health first aider. So you know how to assess the situation, how to listen appropriately, how to make appropriate referrals. Very intense training, but really good stuff. I'm involved in one of the lives that I lead with SAMHSA, which is Substance Abuse and Mental Health Association, and they have a New Jersey collaborative. And the New Jersey Collaborative is a group of nonprofits that are working together to address issues of mental health and substance abuse in our community. So they are actually providing the mental health first aid training. And we will also be doing some things with the church as well. I hope to work interactively with our healing communities.
Now, offline, you mentioned to me the connection between mental health and this issue of mass incarceration. Can you readdress that for us?
You know, I went to mental health first aid training. I was really excited and, you know, not necessarily connecting my two worlds.
Mm-hmm.
And going into that, what I learned was the largest mental health facility in the nation is Rikers Island. And the light went off because I understand that many people who are incarcerated have mental health problems.
Right.
Either they have mental health problems going in, or the trauma of being incarcerated, or for young people who are incarcerated with adults, or they're being tried as adults, because they're not adults. Developmentally, they're not adults, can cause its own set of mental health problems. So when we start to look at incarceration and who's being incarcerated, you know, do they have learning disabilities? Do they have mental health problems? Do they have substance abuse problems? And substance abuse is a sickness, it's not a crime. Why didn't they receive treatment on the front end?
Mm-hmm.
So we want to look at those issues, but we want the community to be aware. If we see a child or we see someone in the community that's behaving a little different, understand that this may, not necessarily, but it may be a mental health problem. So if you understand these warning signs or these signals, then you could get help and treatment appropriately. We don't want to wait until someone does something so that they're now in this pipeline to prison.
But is there really enough help out there for them? So if a mental first aid is the interim, then where are you sending these people for help? What resources are there, or what resources can you provide?
Well, as we prepare each training, we look at the community and we look at all of the community resources so that each training is tailored for a specific community.
Okay.
So if we trained, you know, in northern New Jersey, we would research the appropriate referrals in northern New Jersey, because we want, a key to this is referring people quickly and appropriately.
Right, because just to talk to them on a one-shot deal is not really of much assistance.
Right. So we want to refer. So the training is tailored for the community. Yeah.
So let's talk about, go back to the mass incarceration and the issue of voting rights and felons. Are you, well, specifically, as you know, once you're labeled lifetime felon, you also lose your right to vote. And I was wondering if there was any work regarding that in what you do. And I guess more specific, and even to get more specific, are you doing any, besides the training, are you or are there organizations, religious organizations, doing any kind of organizing around these issues?
Now, there are organizations that do that. We do advocacy and education. So we don't, we wouldn't be involved on that level. Now, there are different churches that may be involved with that. And when they do the healing communities training, they actually help you or help an individual congregation shape what their program looks like. Because the key with healing communities, just as with mental health first aid, is it's tailored to the community and the resources that that congregation is going to put into the training. So in terms of what we're doing, we're not doing anything. Now, we've been doing advocacy around ban the box and that sort of legislation. So we do a lot of advocacy.
Well, explain to us what ban the box is and your advocacy around that.
Okay. The advocacy around ban the box was moving forward towards legislation in New Jersey where we wanted the box. When you look at the application, there's a box that says, you know, are you a convicted felon? That box to be removed from the application. Not that the question could never be broached, but we find that when that box is checked, immediately the application is thrown to the do not interview. The theory behind that is that if we bring people in and they interview, then they will have an opportunity to get employment, because employment is critical for people re-entering. Employment is critical for everybody. We all need you need a job or a business. So that's the type of advocacy. We've done some advocacy also around bail reform and looking at those issues. So we're more advocacy and education.
Tell us more about your future events and how we can get in touch with your organization.
Okay, as I said, you could always go to the Greater New Jersey Annual Conference. Our organizations are on the calendar, and as of today, we have every event that we're going to be having through December listed on my website, and that's vanessawilson.info. In terms of healing communities training, that's going to be November 8th and 9th in northern New Jersey. We will be having, in conjunction with the United Methodist Women, I will be speaking at Red Bank United Methodist Church on October the 18th. And they're going to address the issues, again, of mass incarceration, and also address the issues of women in the system. And that's called a Shout Out for Justice, and that's with the United Methodist Women. On August 30th, because we have a lot of stuff going on August 30th, we're going to have a just-in-time conversation. And a just-in-time conversation is going to be a conversation about race, religion, and criminal justice. And we're going to look at some of the issues that are going on in Missouri, how that translates into the community, how even watching, tanks come into a community can be traumatizing. You don't have to be there to feel the trauma and the impact. So we're going to have a just-in-time conversation, and it's going to be on August 30th at Turning Point United Methodist Church, and that's in Trenton. And again, our mental health first aid training will be in Burlington at the Lyceum on, I have these dates here, on November the 15th. Now we'll have mental health first aid, which is an excellent training. And I encourage everybody to have mental health first aid, even if you're not involved with any type of mass incarceration or this movement, or not even working with returning citizens, but actually with the number of returning citizens, everyone's working with returning citizens, whether you know it or not. So we encourage everyone to get the mental health first aid training.
Well, Dr. Wilson, thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
And thank you.